Hey, what's up guys? It's Lucas and you're watching Fine Tuning. Alright, so today we're talking about the Boogie 5-band graphic EQ pedal from Mesa. And I am a Boogie guy. I've had Mesa Boogies nearly my entire guitar playing career, so I'm very familiar with the concept of the 5-band EQ. But if you're not, let's talk a little bit about how it works and what you might do with it. So first, real quick, signal chain thing. I'm using this Epiphone 50s standard Les Paul Gold Top, just completely stock. And then I'm using this Hughes & Kettner Black Spirit 200 amp, which I absolutely love, and it's running directly into my interface via the red box out. So everything you're hearing is DI from the Hughes & Kettner. And I have the graphic EQ in the effects loop, and that's important. So of course you can run any pedal in front of an amp or in the effects loop, or as I would say in the back of an amp, and it'll work fine. But to me, to get what I think is the kind of quintessential Boogie EQ effect, you need to put it in the effects loop of an amp, or at the very least, if you're running a clean amplifier and you have like all of your distortions coming from a pedal, then you would want to put it after the pedal to get the maximum effect. So for me, there's kind of two main ways that you would use an EQ pedal like this, a graphic EQ pedal, and that would be as a corrective pedal. So if your amp is lacking something, or is got a little too much of something, a little too much bass, or a little too much treble, or you need some mids or something like that, you can use this to add or subtract in a kind of corrective way, or you can use it how I would most likely use it, which is what I would call kind of in conjunction with the amp. So you kind of use the strengths of the amp in conjunction with the strengths of the EQ pedal. So I'm going to cover how both of those things work, but first let's take a look at the controls on the pedal. So first of all, you have the input here, and that is a cable running from the effects send or the preamp out of my amplifier. Then you've got an input level, which controls the signal, the volume of the signal coming into the EQ. And then you've got 5 bands here. You've got 6600 hertz, which is really, really high stuff. 2200 hertz, which is kind of like upper mids. 750, which is really the kind of voice of the guitar and the kind of honky mid-range thing that is guitar. 240, which is kind of the like woody sort of cabinet thump sound. And then 80 or 6, I believe that's, yeah, 80, which is going to be like your really low kind of resonant boom of like a big cabinet. And then of course at the end you've got another volume control, and this is your output level. And so that just controls the overall output volume coming out of the pedal. And then from your output here, that cable goes back into the effects return or the power amp in of your amplifier. Okay, so when I started this video, I was kind of talking about how you could sort of use this in a corrective way or in a more conjunctive way. So in the sense of corrective, let's say you have a sound that, like this one, that you think is pretty good, but you kind of maybe would like a little bit more top end on it, you know? Like, that's a good sound, but maybe I'd like a little more presence. So that's great if you have an amp that has, you know, kind of controls on it that don't do a whole lot, you know, like some of the old Marshalls, like the controls don't do just a whole lot. This pedal can do go a really long way to kind of helping fix that, assuming, like I said, you have an effects loop. So you could also, let's say for instance, like if I turn the bass down on the amp. So let's say that's the amp sound I was working with. Like that's as much bass as I can get out of the amp before it starts to get, you know, farty or something. You know? But in reality, I would like more bottom than that. Then what I can do is just kind of bring in some more of that bottom frequency. All right, so that's the kind of more obvious way to use it, is just to kind of correct a sound, to kind of bring it a little bit closer to what you wanted, something that the amp maybe wouldn't do. But What the Mark series are really known for is using the preamp tone controls in conjunction with the 5-band EQ that's built into the amps, particularly like the 2, 3, 4s, 5s, that kind of stuff. So you can do that with any amp, really, with this kind of pedal. If you just put it in the effects loop, it's going to have a pretty similar thing. So let me show you what I'm talking about. So once again, here's the sound that we have just with everything straight up. So if I want to get that kind of really tight, percussive, kind of John Petrucci type metal tone, you know, when you really hit those chugs hard, you know, you get that kind of stopping, like pipe against a brick wall sound, you know. It's not quite there. So the first thing we want to do, let's go ahead and add some gain, because that's going to be kind of part of that sound. So let's just add a little boost in the front here. I'm just going to hit the boost button on my amp there. Yeah, so that's a sufficient amount of gain. So what we want to do is kind of create the sort of signature Mesa V curve, right? So what that is we're talking about graphically, these faders are kind of look like a V. So I like to kind of start with the 750 fader, kind of pull it down a little bit, maybe not all the way down, but you know, something like that. So that's already kind of starting to make it sound a little meaner. So now what we want to do is kind of boost the treble frequencies a little bit. So we'll kind of maybe pull up the 22 a little bit, and also the 66 a little bit, something like that. Right? And then if we want to add some more kind of bottom to that, then we would pull in that 80 hertz fader and also the 240. And then, so now you see how it's kind of starting to look a little bit like a V here on the pedal. So you get something like this. Okay, so that's a pretty good sound, but it's a little bit woofy and the mid-range is kind of disappearing a little bit. So what you would do is, that's the kind of power amp power amp sort of EQ sound that you want. And now you can kind of adjust the controls, the tone controls on your amp a little bit, and allow the EQ to do that kind of sound. So we got a little too much bass. So what I'm going to do is pull out some of the bass on the amp. I'm also going to pull out the resonance control a little bit, because that's also a bass frequency on this amp. Not all amps have resonance controls, but... So that's pretty tight. That's already pretty tight. So let's go ahead and add some mids and some treble. See where that gets us. And now, as we start to add mids on the amp, we can kind of pull some more of the mid stuff out of the pedal. So. And I'm thinking that maybe we've got a little too much of this 240 here, so we're going to pull that down some. And we can add some more treble on the amp, and that's going to give us some more of the amps attack. But I'm thinking I still want a little bit more attack, so let's go ahead and bring this 2200 fader up here some. You know what else? Let's add some more gain. So now we're kind of getting into like Petrucci territory, right? And what I've done is used the strengths of this amp and its tone controls in conjunction with the strengths of the EQ pedal to generate that sound. And it's important that the two work together because, for instance, if I were to just, let's say, turn the pedal off here, this is the tone that we have coming from the amp. That's not bad, it's not woofy or anything, but it's a little bit sort of like flat on the bottom end and it's real mid-rangey and kind of honky. But if you use the pedal with it, so you can hear how, and this is how Mark Series amps works, like it's so much how you set the two things together, and it's good to have them kind of like, I've got the two things up on a table here so that I can kind of adjust one and then the other, because once you find that magic balance, and I'm kind of just doing like a rough overview of it here, but once you find that magic balance, it's this huge three-dimensional guitar sound that translates from low volumes all the way up to high volumes, and it just sounds like massive, even as one guitar player as a single track. You know, it's just huge sounding. So I'm thinking maybe I want a little more sizzle on the top end, so we'll bring in that 6600 fader. And then what you can do, once you get in with the band and you kind of have that sound sort of where you like it, you can kind of adjust where the guitar sits in the mix by just playing with that 750 fader, because you kind of got the sound feeling the way that you want it to. And so that 750 fader is going to act a lot like the volume of your particular frequency. So if I just bring it up a little bit just to kind of maybe pull it back into the mix some. Now I could and would spend hours dialing this sound in. Like, you can really nitpick where you're getting the mid-range from and where you're cutting the bass and where you're adding the bass and all that kind of stuff, and really dial in like the fine tuning of that sound. But this is just kind of, I wanted to show you this sort of concept here because like I just did this from cold. Like I've never really tried this with this amp before. I just know that it works. So if you spend some time and you really dial in that sound between the two things, you can just get this massive wall of a guitar sound, and it just all comes from working in conjunction with that pedal. So you can do this with other EQ pedals, and I have done it with other EQ pedals like the Boss or the MXR or whatever. There's a bunch of different companies that make EQ pedals. But for whatever reason, there's something about the way that Mesa has dialed in this particular pedal and these faders and the way the Q works, the width of the Q if you were looking at it. And it just, that is the sound. And for me, like, that's part of the boogie thing, is being able to dial it in. It's like, so anyway, go check one of these out. They're awesome. You can buy them used for, you know, less than 200 bucks, which for how well these are built and what they do is absolutely worth it. So anyway, until next time, I'll catch you later.